For literally thousands of years, the rules of war were written in dirt and stone. They were brutal. Yeah, they were bloody, but they were simple. And then, humanity learned to fly. So today, we're going to break down how conquering that third dimension, the vertical one, didn't just add a new piece to the chessboard. It flipped the entire board over, changing the rules of conflict forever.
I mean, seriously, think about it. Every single great commander before the 20th century, Caesar, Napoleon, Genghis Khan, they were all masters of the exact same game, played on a two-dimensional surface. It was all about geography, numbers, and supply lines. That was the whole shebang.
And this was the golden rule, right? It was the absolute unshakable truth of their world. You take ground, you hold ground, you win. Simple. Armies marched, navies controlled the coasts, but at the end of the day, the war was decided by boots on the soil. It was a rule as fundamental as gravity itself.
So what happens when that's no longer true? What happens when you can just fly over the strongest fortress, the widest river, the most impassable mountain? This single question marks one of the most violent, most radical transformations in the history of human conflict. You know, history doesn't turn suddenly. It drifts, then snaps. And believe me, this was the snap.
All right, so let's get into it. Before the airplane, you have to understand, the world was basically flat from a military point of view. All conflict, every bit of strategy was horizontal. To get from point A to point B, you had to cross all the space in between. There were no shortcuts.
And you just can't overstate how much these limits defined everything. Armies were basically tethered to their supply lines like a dog on a leash, moving at a walking pace. Your greatest defense wasn't some big wall. It was the sheer, brutal distance an enemy had to march. And most importantly, war had a clear front line. Everything behind that line was considered safe. That fundamental assumption was about to get completely obliterated.
And then, everything changes. With the arrival of the first rickety airplanes over the trenches of World War I. Now, these weren't the fighters and bombers we think of today. They were fragile things made of wood and canvas. Their purpose was something far more subtle and honestly far more revolutionary: sight.
Just try to put yourself in the shoes of a general for a second. For centuries, your knowledge of the enemy was limited to what a guy on a horse could see from the next hill. Then, all of a sudden, you can lift your eyes thousands of feet into the air and see everything. You can see the enemy's trenches, their supply depots, you can see where they're gathering their troops for a surprise attack. This wasn't just an advantage, it was like being able to read your opponent's mind.
And this right here is the crucial point. A lot of people miss this detail. The first true power of the airplane wasn't its ability to drop a bomb, but its ability to drop knowledge right into a commander's lab. The infamous fog of war, for the very first time, started to lift. This idea, information supremacy, became the bedrock that every other form of air power was built on. Seeing the enemy became the critical first step to defeating them.
Well, you know what happens next, right? As soon as one side could see everything, the other side had to find a way to blind them. What followed was this incredibly rapid, violent, almost panicked escalation. The sky went from a place of quiet observation to a brutal, three-dimensional killing field in just a handful of years.
The speed of this is it's insane. It literally starts with pilots just looking at each other. Then they start taking pot shots with their service pistols. Before you know it, they've figured out how to mount machine guns. Then they're leaning over the side of the cockpit, dropping bombs by hand. In less than a single generation, the airplane goes from a simple recon tool to a strategic weapon. And that single decision to weaponize the sky set everything that followed in motion.
And just like that, the entire reality of war changed. The old war had clear front lines. In the air war, there are no front lines in the sky. The old war had safe rear areas. Not anymore. In the air war, a factory hundreds of miles from the fighting is now a primary target. An army's reach was no longer limited by roads and rivers, but only by the amount of fuel in its planes. The very geography of safety was wiped off the map.
Now, this all comes to a head in 1940. This is the ultimate test case. The German war machine had steamrolled Europe. They stood at the English Channel, ready to invade Great Britain. By every single rule of traditional warfare, that invasion should have worked, but it didn't. And why? Because the Royal Air Force, even though they were outnumbered, refused to give up control of the sky. They proved that a navy can't cross the water and an army can't land on a beach if enemy planes are raining down on them. This is the moment it becomes clear. Air superiority isn't just an advantage anymore. It's the absolute prerequisite for national survival.
So you've got this whole evolution, right? From just looking to dogfighting to strategic bombing, but it was all building toward a single terrifying apex.
A moment where the destructive potential of a single aircraft would become absolute. A moment that would completely redefine what power even means.
One plane. Not a fleet of 1,000 bombers, just one. One bomb.
Not thousands of tons of explosives dropped over months and months. Just one.
On August 6, 1945, a single B-29 bomber delivered the atomic bomb. And for the first time in human history, one aircraft with one weapon could effectively erase an entire city from existence and end a war. Suddenly, air power wasn't just about winning battles or even winning wars. It was now about deterrence. The threat of total, instantaneous annihilation delivered from the air, that became the new, terrifying cornerstone of global geopolitics.
And that single event, that one mission, changed everything. The balance of power, the nature of alliances, the entire psychology of international relations, it all shifted on that one axis. And making sense of these huge pivotal moments is exactly what we try to do here on this channel, because they explain the world we're all living in right now. So if you get value from that, hitting those like and subscribe buttons really truly helps us keep making these for you.
So where did we go from there? Well, the principle was set in stone. Whoever controls the high ground controls the battle. But the definition of that high ground was about to expand dramatically, reaching speeds and altitudes those early pilots could never have even dreamed of.
The post-war years were just a blur of new technology. Propeller planes gave way to jets, trading loitering time for unbelievable speed and altitude. Then came guided missiles, which meant you didn't even have to see your enemy to destroy them. And finally, satellites connected everything, turning the sky into a massive, networked sensor grid. That idea from World War I, information supremacy, was now global and instantaneous.
And this brings us to the ironclad law of modern warfare. We've seen this pattern repeat in every single major conflict of the last 70 years. Sure, ground forces are still essential to hold territory, but they cannot take it, they can't even move without total control of the air above them. To be on the ground without air cover is simply to be a target. Victory on land is now completely dependent on achieving victory in the sky first. Period.
All right, now I gotta turn this over to you. We've covered a ton of ground here, from those first flimsy observation planes to the jet engine, from the machine gun to the guided missile. What do you think was the single biggest game changer? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious to see what you all think, and I really do try to read as many as I can.
So we end on this thought. This struggle for the ultimate high ground has defined military history. We went from hills to mountains to the sky. Today, people argue that the next high ground is space, or maybe cyberspace. The technology always changes, but that fundamental principle, it stays the same. So the question is, what comes next, and who's going to control it? Thanks for watching.